Florence. The year is 1513. The streets are alive with merchants, soldiers, priests, spies, and ambitious men who understand one simple truth. Kingdoms are not held together by good intentions. Behind every smiling diplomat stands a hidden calculation. Behind every alliance waits the possibility of betrayal. A city can celebrate its ruler one morning and demand his downfall before sunset. In this world, survival belongs not to the strongest, nor even the smartest, but to those who understand how power truly moves through human nature. It was into this uncertain world that Niccolò Machiavelli found himself cast aside. Once a respected diplomat of the Florentine Republic, he spent years negotiating with kings, generals, and popes. He watched rulers succeed, collapse, deceive, inspire, and destroy themselves. Then fortune turned against him. When the powerful Medici family returned to Florence, Machiavelli was dismissed, imprisoned, accused of conspiracy, and subjected to torture before being released into political exile. Stripped of office and influence, he retreated to the countryside. During the day, he worked the land. At night, he entered his study, changed into formal clothes as if attending a royal court, and immersed himself in the histories of Rome, Greece, and the great rulers of Europe. Out of those quiet evenings emerged one of the most debated political works ever written, The Prince. For centuries, the book has carried a reputation almost as famous as its author. To some, it is a handbook for tyranny. To others, it is the most honest examination of power ever written. Its name has even become an adjective. When people describe someone as a Machiavellian, they usually mean manipulative, calculating, and willing to sacrifice morality for success. But that reputation raises an important question. Did Machiavelli encourage ruthless behavior, or was he simply describing the world as he observed it? Was he telling rulers how they should behave, or warning us how power actually operates when survival is at stake? That question matters because the forces Machiavelli observed did not disappear with Renaissance Italy. Governments have changed. Technology has transformed communication. Corporations have replaced many kingdoms. Yet ambition, fear, loyalty, reputation, competition, and uncertainty remain remarkably familiar. Human nature has not evolved as quickly as our institutions. This episode is not about celebrating manipulation or condemning it. It is about examining one of history's most influential books with clear eyes. We will separate historical fact from interpretation, follow Machiavelli's arguments as they unfold, and ask where his observations still illuminate the choices people face today and where they deserve to be challenged. Because before deciding whether The Prince offers wisdom or danger, we first need to understand the world that gave birth to it. When Machiavelli began writing The Prince, Italy was not a unified nation but a fractured landscape of rival city-states, foreign armies, ambitious noble families, and shifting alliances. Florence, Venice, Milan, Naples, and the Papal States each pursued survival in a world where yesterday's ally could become tomorrow's invader. France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire repeatedly marched into Italian territory, treating the peninsula as a prize to be claimed rather than a homeland to be respected. Machiavelli did not observe this chaos from a distance. As a Florentine diplomat, he negotiated with rulers, witnessed military campaigns, and watched governments collapse with astonishing speed. He saw that political speeches often promised stability while fear, ambition, and fortune quietly determined outcomes behind closed doors. This experience shaped the opening question of The Prince: what allows a ruler to acquire power, and more importantly, what allows that ruler to keep it? Notice where Machiavelli begins. He does not begin with morality, religion, or ideals. He begins with reality. Before asking what ought to happen, he asks what actually happens when human beings compete for power. That distinction explains why the book has unsettled readers for more than 500 years. Many political writers before him described the perfect ruler. Machiavelli examined rulers as they existed, with their strengths, weaknesses, mistakes, fears, and ambitions. He separates principalities into different kinds because he believes each presents its own challenges. Some kingdoms are inherited, where long traditions make obedience familiar. Others are newly acquired through conquest, inheritance, diplomacy, or fortune. New possessions, he argues, are always more fragile because people compare the new ruler with the old one. Those who expected improvement become impatient when change arrives more slowly than promised. Those who benefited from the previous order quietly wait for opportunities to restore it. Even supporters can become disappointed once the difficult work of governing replaces the excitement of victory. Machiavelli's observation reaches far beyond Renaissance politics. Every leadership transition carries the same hidden tension. A newly appointed executive inherits expectations that cannot all be fulfilled. A new mayor promises reform while discovering institutions resistant to change. A family business passes from one generation to another, only to learn that earning authority is harder than inheriting a title. Even outside formal leadership, people often imagine that changing jobs, cities, or relationships will erase old problems, only to discover that every new beginning creates its own uncertainties. Machiavelli is not celebrating conflict. He is exposing a pattern in human nature. People rarely judge change on its intentions alone. They judge it by whether their own lives improve, and they judge quickly. The lesson is not that trust is impossible, but that stability cannot be built on hope alone. Every transition demands patience, competence, and an understanding that loyalty is not automatically transferred simply because authority has changed hands. Before Machiavelli ever reaches his controversial arguments about fear, force, or deception, he establishes a quieter truth that often goes unnoticed. Leadership begins with seeing the world as it is rather than as we wish it to be. Only after accepting that reality, he suggests, can anyone hope to shape it. The next question, however, is even more difficult. If gaining power is one challenge, what happens when the very people who helped you succeed become your greatest source of danger? One of the first historical figures Machiavelli examines is not a saint, but a man whose name still sparks debate centuries later, Cesare Borgia. The son of Pope Alexander VI, Borgia inherited advantages that few men could ever hope to possess. Through his father's influence, he gained territory, wealth, and military support, but Machiavelli was not interested in Borgia because he was born powerful. He was fascinated by what Borgia did after fortune opened the door. During his diplomatic missions, Machiavelli observed him closely and believed he had witnessed a ruler who understood that winning territory was only the beginning. Conquest created a tension. Governing required something far more difficult. Newly acquired lands were often unstable because old loyalties lingered beneath the surface. Local nobles protected their own interests, rival families waited for opportunities to rebel, and ordinary people wondered whether the new ruler would improve their lives or merely replace one master with another. Borgia responded with deliberate calculation. In the Romagna region, which had suffered years of violence and disorder, he appointed the harsh governor Ramiro de Orco to restore stability. The governor acted with ruthless efficiency, imposing order where law had nearly disappeared. Once peace had returned, however, Borgia publicly executed him and displayed his body in the town square. To modern readers, the act is shocking, and it should be. It was brutal, calculated, and impossible to separate from its political purpose. Machiavelli does not celebrate the cruelty itself. Instead, he analyzes the strategy behind it. By allowing one official to carry out severe measures and then removing him publicly, Borgia attempted to separate himself from the resentment those actions had created while claiming credit for the restored peace. Whether one accepts or condemns this reasoning, Machiavelli believed it revealed an uncomfortable reality about political leadership. People often judge leaders not only by what happens but by who appears responsible for it. Reputation, in his view, becomes part of governing itself. This observation extends beyond princes and kingdoms. Modern leaders rarely order public executions, but they often distance themselves from unpopular decisions, reorganize leadership after failures, or remove visible figures to restore public confidence. Companies replace executives after scandals. Political administrations dismiss advisors during crises. Organizations sometimes believe changing the face of leadership will change public perception, even when deeper structural problems remain untouched. Machiavelli invites us to notice this pattern, rather than pretend it does not exist. Yet the story of Cesare Borgia also carries an equally important warning that is sometimes overlooked. Despite his intelligence, planning, and political skill, Borgia ultimately lost everything because the foundation of his power depended heavily on circumstances beyond his control. When Pope Alexander VI died unexpectedly, the alliances and protections that had sustained Borgia quickly began to unravel. A new pope had different interests. Old enemies returned. Fortune, which had elevated him so rapidly, abandoned him with equal speed. Machiavelli admired Borgia's ability, but also acknowledged that even the most capable leader cannot eliminate uncertainty. Skill may prepare us for changing conditions, but it cannot guarantee control over them. This introduces one of the central tensions running quietly through the prince: how much of success belongs to human ability and how much belongs to fortune. Before Machiavelli answers that question, he turns to another subject that may be even more controversial: the dangerous mistake of relying on someone else's strength instead of building your own. As Machiavelli continued his examination of power, he reached a conclusion that challenged one of the greatest assumptions of his time. Many rulers believed their security rested in the armies they could hire. Across Renaissance Italy, mercenary companies, professional soldiers who fought for whoever paid the highest price, had become a common feature of war. They promised experienced commanders, disciplined troops, and quick military strength without requiring citizens to take up arms themselves. On the surface, the arrangement seemed practical. Why spend years building a loyal army when experienced fighters could simply be purchased? Machiavelli believed this reasoning had become one of Italy's greatest political disasters. Drawing from both his own diplomatic experience and the history he studied, he argued that mercenaries were dangerous precisely because their loyalty belonged not to a nation or a prince, but to their own survival and profit. They might fight bravely when victory appeared likely, yet hesitate when real sacrifice became necessary. A hired army could abandon a campaign, change sides, negotiate with the enemy, or prolong a conflict if continued war meant continued payment. Worse still, if a mercenary commander became too successful, he could become a greater threat to the ruler who employed him than to the enemy they had been hired to defeat. Machiavelli pointed to numerous examples from Italian history where states placed their security in the hands of men who possessed every incentive except genuine loyalty. To him, the lesson was unmistakable: a ruler who depends entirely upon another person's strength is never truly secure. His criticism did not stop with mercenaries. He was equally skeptical of auxiliary troops, armies borrowed from another ruler. At first glance, such alliances appeared even stronger because the soldiers belonged to an established kingdom rather than private contractors. Yet Machiavelli argued that auxiliaries created an even greater danger. If they lost, the prince stood defenseless. If they won, the prince became indebted to a powerful ally whose interests might eventually overshadow his own. Either outcome left independence weakened. This was not simply military advice. It reflected a broader principle running throughout the prince: dependence creates vulnerability. Every decision that places your future entirely in someone else's hands carries risks that may remain invisible until circumstances change. The idea extends well beyond the battlefields of Renaissance Italy. A business that relies on a single customer may appear successful until that contract disappears. A country that depends entirely on foreign supply chains may discover its weakness during a crisis. An employee whose career rests solely upon one influential mentor may struggle if that leader leaves. Even individuals can become trapped when they surrender all responsibility for their own judgment to charismatic personalities, institutions, or public opinion. Machiavelli is not arguing against cooperation or alliances. History demonstrates that alliances can preserve nations, defeat common threats, and create lasting prosperity. His concern lies elsewhere. Cooperation strengthens both parties only when each possesses enough independent capability to negotiate from a position of stability rather than desperation. The strongest partnerships are formed by those who can contribute, not merely depend. This distinction remains remarkably relevant because modern life often rewards convenience over resilience. It is tempting to outsource difficult decisions, difficult skills, and difficult responsibilities, believing someone else will always provide what we lack. Machiavelli would caution that convenience can quietly become dependence, and dependence eventually becomes leverage in someone else's hands. Yet even if a ruler builds loyal institutions, trustworthy supporters, and independent strength, another force remains beyond calculation. Armies can be trained. Laws can be written. Alliances can be negotiated. But what happens when events no one can predict overturn even the best laid plans? It is here that Machiavelli turns from strategy to one of the oldest questions in human history: how much of our lives belongs to our own choices, and how much belongs to fortune? By the time Machiavelli reaches his discussion of fortune, he has already dismantled many comforting illusions. Noble intentions do not guarantee stability. Inherited power does not ensure loyalty. Hired strength cannot replace committed institutions. Yet even after a ruler has prepared wisely, another reality refuses to disappear: uncertainty. History is filled with capable leaders who were undone by events they neither expected nor deserved, while others rose to extraordinary heights because circumstances happened to favor them. Machiavelli refuses to ignore either side of this equation. He calls this unpredictable force fortune not as a mystical power that rewards or punishes people, but as the countless events that remain outside human control. A sudden illness changes a succession. A storm destroys a fleet. An economic collapse reshapes a nation. An assassination alters history. A technological breakthrough transforms entire industries. No amount of intelligence can eliminate the existence of uncertainty. The question, then, is not whether fortune exists. The question is how much influence it should be allowed to have over our lives. Machiavelli argues that while fortune governs part of human affairs, it does not govern all of them. He famously compares it to a powerful river. During calm seasons, people have the opportunity to build embankments, strengthen foundations, and prepare for future floods. Those preparations cannot prevent the river from rising, but they can determine whether a flood becomes an inconvenience or a catastrophe. The metaphor is remarkably practical because it shifts attention away from prediction and toward preparation. Human beings spend enormous amounts of energy trying to forecast the future with certainty, even though certainty has always remained beyond reach. Markets fluctuate, governments change, relationships evolve, new competitors emerge, health declines without warning. Entire careers can be transformed by innovations that did not exist a decade earlier. Machiavelli's response is neither optimism nor pessimism. It is preparedness. Build the habits, institutions, skills, and character that allow you to respond when circumstances change instead of assuming circumstances will remain favorable forever. This idea also explains another of Machiavelli's central concepts, virtue. Modern readers often mistake the word for moral virtue, but Machiavelli means something different. He describes the qualities that enable a leader to recognize changing realities and adapt with intelligence, courage, discipline, and decisiveness. Virtue is not perfection. It is the capacity to meet reality without becoming trapped by old assumptions. Leaders fail, he suggests, not only because fortune turns against them, but because they continue using yesterday's solutions to solve today's problems. A strategy that created success in one generation may become disastrous in the next if circumstances have fundamentally changed. This observation extends far beyond princes. Businesses collapse when they refuse to adapt to new technologies. Nations decline when they ignore changing economic realities. Individuals struggle when they cling to identities that no longer fit the world they inhabit. Preparation without adaptability becomes rigidity. Adaptability without preparation becomes chaos. Wisdom lies in combining both. Yet perhaps the greatest challenge Machiavelli leaves us with is not political at all. It is deeply personal. Every generation believes its uncertainties are unprecedented, but history tells a different story. The names change. The technologies evolve. The institutions rise and fall. Still, people continue wrestling with ambition, fear, loyalty, reputation, uncertainty, and the unpredictable turns of fortune. The prince endures not because it offers comfortable answers, but because it forces us to confront an enduring question. When circumstances shift beyond our control, will we cling to comforting illusions, or will we possess the judgment to see reality clearly enough to change with it?